Welcome to the Pantheon Plus Rewind. My friends, summertime is here, and so is episode 108 of the Pantheon Plus Rewind. That means it's time for our weekly road trip down the development highway of Pantheon Rise of the Fallen and visiting friends and family that make up the Pantheon community. This week, we'll sit around Joppa's bonfire to see what he had to say in the latest developer roundtable, wade into the ocean of a discussion about zones, grab some drinks from the cooler that we call a mailbox, and chill out to the mixtape that is the tale of a Rockamel. So load up the van, open the sunroof, and join me, Theric, and my navigator co-host, Desrin, as we declare this holiday to have started on this week's Rewind. So in case you can't tell there, Desrin, I am officially on vacation.
He's very excited to be on vacation.
Super excited, man. I got 2 weeks off, and I always do on holidays. I always like to make like a list of like fun things I want to do over the holidays, like what I want to do, like games I want to finish, books I want to read, just little things I never have time to do. So I've got my list prepared. My wife's got hers. We've got some stuff to do, and I think we're going to have a good time. So,
dude, that's really smart. Cause like whenever I have like a, time off or something, I never planned. And so I just end up like kind of, not doing anything. So that's really smart. I should follow suit.
Well, I make lists. I don't always follow them as much as I should, but at least the list has been made. The intent is there. Whether it gets done or not is a different story. So,
dude,
we'll check back in a couple of weeks.
We've got quite a list as well, don't we? I'm sorry I stole it from you, but it was there.
Beautiful. I don't care. As long as it gets out there, it doesn't matter who it comes from. Yeah, we've got quite a list today. This is the biggest raid party we've ever had. So let's get through this thing, because we've got Ziplocks on the Darkmer Rogue, Sparrow on the Elf Ranger, Bounty Code on the Human Wizard, Screech on the Scar Bard, Wiki Woo on the Human Enchanter, Shuriken on the Dwarf Cleric, Horsasaurus on the Human Warrior, Fury Wrath on the Archai Summoner, Christopher on the Human Paladin, who's a new Patreon member, and I wanted to ask what their race and class is for Pantheon, because I don't know, so I just made them a Human Paladin. So send me a message through the Patreon if you want, Christopher. Mugen on the Scar Beardlord, Anton on the Darkmere Shaman Keeper, love the Keeper edition there, Deimos on the Darkmer Cleric, Dave Bowers on the Human Ranger, Theldern on the Darkmer Paladin, Random Rob on the Human Juggler, Pimander on the Gnome Summoner, Sarah Avienda on the Sassy Elf Druid, Zergjerk on the Dwarf Rogue, and Man of Rohan on the Ember Elf Ranger, whom I missed last week and I feel terrible about, so sorry about that, my friend, but we got you this week. So that's a huge list. That's 19 people, and in case you can't tell, we're getting like a raid every week.
Yes.
It's super exciting. And yeah, I'm pretty stunned actually. So I want to say thank you so much to everybody, because it's actually a lot, but it's also becoming a kind of unmanageable to read out. So, in the interest of time and keeping our intros relatively short and the podcast flowing, I want to try and change it up a little bit. We're going to do something a little different. What I'm going to do is read the names of the Patreon Rewind party members, and then those who contribute to the show through the super chat, we're going to add their names to a race and class to a scrolling banner that's going to play over the background video that you can see throughout the show. So hopefully that works out. The graphics not going to change, and the one at the end of the show won't change either, but just in terms of trying to save some time and space through reading it out. Hopefully that works for everyone. If you want to join in, check out the Patreon page. It's linked in the description, and hit the super chat button if you want to get your spot in the group. And again, thank you everyone so much for your support. It's very much appreciated. But big list, big party this week. Desrin, you ready to set off?
Dude, let's cruise.
This week in Visionary Realms News and Notes. All right, let's start with the upcoming events for July that VR released this week. And of course, that starts on July 1st with the public release of the last developer roundtable, which we're going to dig into on the show today. Then on July 14th, the live VR dev stream is on tap. And the tease they gave us for this is that the team traverses new heights to talk world building. So if you look really closely at the screenshot that accompanies the announcement, I think they're kind of teasing something else as well, what you might be seeing. And do you see what I see there, Des? Yeah, that's fine.
Well, I'm sure everyone that listens to this show could guess. I'm pretty excited for this update. There's been some speculation as to where that screenshot might be from, and I want to talk about it a little bit, but I feel like it's a little bit borderline, and I'd want to bring up some things that people have said in the VIP Discord. So it's kind of like but I'm definitely excited to just kind of see what they've improved upon for those mountains, because I feel like it's starting to become a part of my identity. Talking about that.
Yeah, you never can guess what's going to become a part of your identity and what isn't, but you've certainly attached yourself to the mountains. You've become like a mountaineer, if you will, and I think you're right. I mean, I think that's what they're talking about in this announcement, and world building's always a fun topic. It always goes over really well. We always get to see something new and fun and like a new piece of the world we haven't seen before. Even if it's something we have seen before, we see it in a different light, which is always fun. So I'm looking forward to that. But after that, on July 21st, VR releases their monthly newsletter. And then the month finishes up with what I think is the most interesting part of this calendar, and that's the special all-access developer roundtable that is going to be open to everyone to attend rather than just the VIPs. So let's spend a minute on this here, Des, because it sort of ignited a bit of speculation as to what VR is up to here. I've seen chatter and had some time to sort of ponder this. So I'm going to give you some speculation. Again, this is purely me speculating here, but I think this is an announcement of two things. So firstly, my guess is that they're going to announce the final pre-alpha testing session date because they've hinted at that in the last few months that this is on the way. And not saying they're going to start it, but they're going to announce at least the date. And then is the second part of that being the end of maybe the pre-alpha pledge tiers. Because we've talked about this before, that they have to there has to be like a prelude to alpha where they have to cut off the pre-alpha pledging. And I think they want to give as many folks one last chance to maybe get into a PA test, but still offer that value, for a PA level pledge, which, you clearly, if this was the case, you're not going to be getting a whole lot of time unless it's a really big window. But you would still be able to, if you chose to pledge at that level, get in there and do that. Now, they might actually do that in the newsletter, and then the roundtable's like fielding questions about the time frame for this. But again, I'm speculating here. This is totally a guess on my part. But we do know, they do, like I said, have to rework some of those pledge structures at some point before moving into alpha. I feel like this might be the moment for that. They did open up their official Discord to everyone a little while ago, and I feel like that's, the first stage, and this might be the next step. But that's my guess, and I'm sure you have your own ideas about what this is all about, I guess.
Well, I mean, I'll be honest with you, man. I think the idea of them kind of announcing the final PA, quote unquote final, I think it's pretty out there. But
I don't mind being out there. I'm out there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just not sure they're ready to announce the end of the PA pledges either. There's a chance maybe, but I do agree with one thing though, and that's that, whatever they put into the newsletter, I do think they'll be taking questions live, somehow for the DRT. And I really do hope they use this kind of to immediately respond to whatever's in that newsletter, to kind of keep that communication loop really tight, which I think is a great idea, right? Especially for anything potentially big.
Yeah, I could see that. And then that, you're right. I mean, that kind of like week after connection would be really cool, right?
Yeah, I think that would be really smart if that's what they're going for. But as far as like the announcement goes, I think if there is an announcement, first of all, just because they don't really say that there's a big announcement or something, they just say it's an all access, right? And that could mean anything.
It could. It could.
I think it could be announcing the next PA session. That would make sense. But like outside of that, I'm kind of more confident in what we won't see, right? I'm obviously not subscribing to some of the more optimistic projections that they're going to announce alpha date or something like that. So,
well, I didn't say that. I'm not saying they're announcing an alpha date. I was going to put that in the notes because I wanted to be clear that I'm not saying they're going to announce. I'm saying they're going to announce the end of sort of pre-alpha testing, right?
Yeah.
So there may be like a buffer zone between that when that ends and like alpha testing begins.
But see, I think in that sense, the end of PA is so close to the beginning of alpha, though, because they're going to really want to test that final build before alpha hits.
Yeah.
And so it would basically be the same thing in my mind, at least really close.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I honestly think the most likely thing, and this sounds super lame, but again, I'm setting my expectations, fairly low. Did you see that Bascom actually pointed this out? He posted a screenshot of the recent art team that's grown.
Yes, I did see that.
And it's getting pretty big. Team's getting pretty big. And I think maybe they just want to kind of celebrate that. So they might announce the new hires in the newsletter, and then maybe the DRT will just kind of be a place that everyone can introduce themselves. So, maybe take a few questions, who knows? But yeah, I don't think it's going to be any like timeline stuff personally.
I could see that. Yeah, I could see that. You might be right, and it's always better to keep those expectations in check. I don't mind being the one to be disappointed if need be. That's fine. I wouldn't be disappointed anyway. Really, either way. I'm just like I like to get a little more out there with my thinking perhaps sometimes. But and the other thing about this too is that it kind of, I think it might have some interesting sort of side effects in that it's going to bring in more people into the official Discord. Right? Because if they're opening it up for everybody, I mean, it's kind of interesting because...
Actually, on that note, I did want to mention, because you said the Discord's open to everyone. It's open to everyone that's pledged. Just to be super clear, if we have any listeners that haven't pledged, like, it still is just for all tiers.
Well, that's my question, though. I mean, if you look at the way it's described, it says open to all. Time and location will be included in the newsletter.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? Does that mean it's still only open to people who have pledged, or does that mean all?
I think it sounds like it's going to be on Twitch or something like that instead of in the Discord.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah. Because the location
we're so used
thing,
to it being right. Yeah, they did mention location, so maybe it's not. Maybe I was assuming it would be in the Discord as it's always been in the past, but this might be a Twitch thing. So well, I don't know. Lots of unknowns that you never know what could happen. Anything's possible. But anyway, so that's something to definitely look forward to. I think July is going to be an awesome month for Pantheon's development. So now let's move on to last month's roundtable where Joppa talked about Pantheon's dungeon design. And the newsletter was actually pretty cool because it was more than just the high level principle, or the roundtable rather was more than just like the high level principles that were talked about in the newsletter. It actually gave us some cold hard facts, and if I'm being honest, that's a little surprising sometimes when we get that. So here's some bullet points for you, Desert, and jump in where you want here, because I'm sure you have some thoughts on these. The first one I noted was VR said their current goal is to have 15 dungeons available at launch, and that includes the overland dungeons. And then Joppa kind of detailed what differentiates an underground versus an overland dungeon, saying it's a bit of a misnomer from a literal standpoint, because the only real difference is style and scope. Where it's located isn't really what the name means. Overland dungeons are basically smaller, and underground ones are larger. He cited Black Rose Keep as a good example that it's above ground, but it's an underground dungeon in its style. So I thought that was really cool. And the 15 dungeons, getting a number, something like that is what their goal is pretty neat. So what do you think about that?
I definitely have thoughts here. And then this came up literally like immediately. There's during the DRT, the obvious question is like, oh man, only 15 dungeons? And then it, went into some other kind of side conversations. And obviously you want to ask like, what counts as a dungeon then? And there were a bunch of like kind of attempts at clarifying that, but I be honest, man, I kind of wish they had skipped this question, or at least didn't directly respond, because it's still a number, man. And even with all the caveats that they kind of put behind that, it's stuff that people are going to attach to and draw conclusions from. And I think it's something that we just kind of have to be patient and see how it plays out. And that's why I'm not a huge fan of these numbers. Someone actually pointed out during the conversations we've had on the Discord, just that, EQ actually launched with about 15 dungeons, I guess. And playing EQ2's Varsoon server, I realized that EQ2 technically had even less at launch. It's actually quite limited. But it all kind of depends on what you count as a dungeon. And I think we'll be seeing a ton of overland areas that aren't considered dungeons that'll still be like major points of interest. And so the 15 number, I think, is, if anything, it'll cause a lot of discussion. And, I'm thankful for that. But, as far as being like, oh, well, like 15 dungeons, and then one of the biggest conversations was like counting the dungeons of King's Reach and being like, oh man, well, that only leaves so many dungeons for Rainfall or White Thaw. And I think it's too early to start really, putting those things together personally.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's not so much like the number is too low for you. It's more of like getting too specific, like setting expectations too clearly, That's what you're saying?
Yeah, because I mean, even when we're talking or like adding up the King's Reach dungeons, you could think, oh well, all these dungeons are on King's Reach, and that means only 3 dungeons are left for Rainfall or something like that, and you could be upset that Rainfall seems like the neglected continent, but that might not be the case at all. It might be 3 extremely major dungeons, and then a ton of like open world points of interest that just aren't counted. It could be all sorts of things, man, and that's why it's kind of like itching a little bit with the 15.
To me, I didn't have that reaction. To me, 15 seemed like a good number. It seemed like a reasonable number, especially when you get into it a little more, as we're going to here, in terms of what that actually means. Because, in terms of like scale and scope, like, so you're saying like, what is a dungeon? Is it a point of interest? Like, how far does that definition go out? Joppa talked about that a little bit in terms of scale and scope. He said, actually, Black Rose Keep is actually one of their smallest dungeons, while Halner Cave is a medium-sized dungeon, and then went on to emphasize, like, even with how much of Halner Cave they've shown on stream and players in PA testing have done, there's still areas nobody's found yet.
Yeah.
And that's amazing, right? So think about that. Like, that's a medium-sized dungeon. Now, what's a large dungeon? How...
Yeah.
So when you have dungeons of this scale and scope, do you need more than 15? Do you really need, would you rather have quality or quantity?
For sure. And we're talking about dungeons that cover so many tiers of play as well. So, the obvious question would be like, so like Amber Fate or something. It's like, all right, is Amber Fate a zone, or is it a dungeon, or is it multiple points of interest all in one? Like, if it is a dungeon, it seems like it covers like 20 levels. so like, I mean, that's pretty major to me. Yeah. So I don't know. It's definitely something to see how it plays out. I don't have a problem with the number at all. But I do want to see how it, like, what it means matters so much more than how many.
Yeah. I think Amber Fate, I mean, just from what we've seen, and my guess is that Amber Fate's definitely a large scale dungeon. I think it's probably, just from what we've seen, that's my guess, is that they're aiming towards making it one of the larger dungeons in the game. And I think if you sort of like, on the balance, you were talking about Rainfall versus, White Thaw versus King's Reach, you get 3 large dungeons versus 6, small and 3 mediums, it sort of balances out, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and you talk about scale, and you said multi-tier, and that's even another thing that was brought up in this roundtable, because Joppa talked about some dungeons being linked, right? So he said that there's specifically a thing, a place called the 7 Locked Door, and you can see it on the old concept art map of the world, that they've never talked about it. We know absolutely nothing about it.
And then Joppa wasn't going to say anything either. He threw it out there, and then just
he had to bite his tongue quite a bit.
There was a lot of biting of the tongue. Yeah.
His tongue was bloody by the time he was done from chewing on it so hard. But yeah, we don't know anything about it. Basically, they've never shown it. They never talked about it. All you know is see it on the map, and that's it. So, but he did say this is a good example of a dungeon that's linked to other areas and can go across zones or regions. He mentioned another one called Mangle Rock, which they have mentioned a few times, but again, we've never seen it. We don't know anything about it. I don't even think we've seen concept art of it. But he went into detail about basically as you go deeper, you'll come to what he described as sort of being like a point of no return. And if you proceed, you end up in another different dungeon, maybe a different region, area of the world. Talked about linking them by cross zones. Did sort of pull it back and say, like, because somebody asked, like, would it be linking continents?
Yeah.
Could you travel to one continent from another? He's like, no, not on that scale yet. But I love that idea, right? Like, how cool is that you could start in Amber Fate and end up on another area of White completely, or maybe in the Dwarven city, right?
Well, so I want to tag on to that Mangle Rock thing, because there is a bit that is even more exciting, and I think he described, and I'm kind of going off of my head knowledge here, so sorry I don't have a specific note, but if I remember right, he actually described there's a point in Mangle Rock that is just it appears to be an endless abyss.
Yes.
And
he did talk about that.
The first thing I think of, man, someone is going to have to do the leap of faith. Someone's going to have to see.
Probably a druid. So I'm looking at you because you can pour it out if you need to. Maybe, I don't know.
That's a whole other thing. That's a whole other thing. Anyway.
Yeah.
Lots of exciting stuff.
Totally exciting. And, again, just quality over quantity, I think, is the refrain that I kept coming back to. And rather than having 50 dungeons of, limited linear design, I'd rather have 15 of really well-crafted, intricate design.
Yep. I'm really glad you actually mentioned the multi-tier part, though, because even when we're talking about the 15, the number or whatever, I think it's so clear that these dungeons are going to span much larger level ranges than we're used to, right? And that's really important for Pantheon. I think we're going to be spending like a lot of time in these dungeons, dwelling there, and I'm a huge fan of that multi-part dungeon concept. Like, I really love going into a dungeon to find it kind of change and become something completely different as you get further and further from the entrance, and I mentioned some EQ2 and Vanguard dungeons in the past, that do things like that, like, Stormhold, like there's like several distinct like levels, right? And it's just so cool. It makes you feel like you're really, like, you kind of step back in time, or like you actually discovered something really special when you end up in an area that is different than when you started. But the idea of going in and ending up in a completely different zone is so exciting to me. Yeah.
Even Halnir, like in what they've shown of Halnir, it starts off looking very different. By the time they get down to the bottom, and they're fighting in it's like the more blue stone kind of type of environment. It's very different from the beginnings of Halnir Cave, right?
Oh yeah.
And I think I think that's such a cool thing, and I'm excited for it just as much as you are. And the last thing that I wanted to highlight that they talked about was Choppa said about campfires. These are the places that, they've sort of deemed safe spots and dungeons. And they've talked about previously, being meant to be places players can camp out, come back at another time, and sort of not be afraid of craziness. So Joppa actually added a new piece of information that they haven't talked about before. He said that they have plans to allow players to summon other players to these spots, as long as the player being summoned had previously visited that spot. This is kind of big news. It makes me very happy to hear this, and it makes a lot of sense to me. I wouldn't be surprised if this kind of utilization of a spot like this is done for other things too. In fact, actually, in my last video, I speculated that these campfire spots, and I showed the one in Amber Fate that they showed with Ko on a stream a long time ago, might be where keepers can swap out their abilities, because they did say keepers can't just do it like your normal limited action set swap out. They would only be designated in certain areas. So that was kind of like my guess, but this is a pretty big bean, if you ask me. Do you like this, that people can summon other players to a dungeon in Campfire?
Oh man, I actually think this was such a huge drop, and like just a major reveal for the DRT, and this would be like
Right.
my point of focus actually. But like obviously I can't make any calls until we know the full like mechanics of it, like all the specifics and everything. But like off the cuff, I would say this sounds kind of like a system of checkpoints in an adventure game, right?
Yeah. Yep.
That's exactly what I
exactly.
think of. And
Yep.
so I actually love the idea of summoning players as long as they have to get there first.
Yes, that's the key.
Yeah.
That's really, I'm glad you pointed that out because that is the key. Otherwise, it's a nonsense. Otherwise, it's crap and it won't work. If you make, as long as you make players get to some place first. And I mean, this is a game mechanic that gets used in different ways in various games, right? But smart design.
Yeah, it is really key because I mean I really could see the gameplay developing where people like leave alts at different dungeon campfires and
Right.
summon their whole guild or something just to like bunny hop another group or stuff like that. I'm not a really big fan of gameplay that involves just leaving a character park somewhere. So
No, no, me
with the
too.
right restrictions, I'd love to see this. Like it'll make filling out a group in a dungeon so much easier. Oh, and this is kind of a great side effect of this. It gives a kind of horizontal progression. Because if you don't unlock all these checkpoints, you can't be summoned, right? As long as they have that feature. So not only do you get that kind of sense of accomplishment and relief, when you get to one of the
Hmm.
campfires, but it also feels like you're adding to your character because, if you just nose of the grindstone spent all your time in like 2 areas to get to 50, just to,
Hmm.
optimize your leveling process or something like that, you're gonna have a really hard time at first getting to all the other spots and all the other
Yep.
dungeons you'll almost certainly need to get to, even if you did get to 50. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, oh, we should probably point out. I know you kind of said that they're planning on it, but I think the word that was used was potentially somewhere in
That's a
there.
good point.
So I think this is great with the right finagling, but it is still technically a potentially thing. So we'll see how it plays out, right?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I really like what you said about the horizontal progression too. I didn't thought of that, but like, being getting all the campfire spots checked off your list, is
Yep.
sort of a thing that people are going to want to do, right? Because it makes them more versatile in terms of, should they be just looking for a pickup group, or maybe they want to be available at any time for a certain dungeon when a camp becomes available or a group has a need for them. You're going to want to just be able to get there. So you're going to want to make an effort to check all those campsites
Yep.
off your list if that's your goal,
And like
right?
running
So
running guild members, like, oh, we need to get you to the frost giant room
yeah,
campfire in the tier 3 version or tier 3 campfire of Amber Fate or
Amber
something
Fate.
like
Yeah.
that, where it's like it's a journey that you can have a goal, right? And
Hmm.
and another side of this was the whole like they want that 2-3 hour like window, right? And it gives your
Yeah.
group like a goal. Okay, let's just get to this next campfire. Let's just get to this, and I love that feeling that it feels like an adventure game. Like
Yeah, it totally does. Yeah, I love it too, and I'm really happy about this. And I couldn't be more stoked for being able to stay in a group, stay connected, and get to your dungeon when your guild or your group needs you there. So I think that's really smart design. So those are the things that stood out to me. Anything else in this roundtable, Desert, that piqued your
oh
interest?
man, well I would say it wasn't as dense as the previous round table, but there are definitely a few other little things I'd like to kind of point out real quick. Um, I I actually really think this particular point is very very important, and it was kind of glossed over a little bit. But they're really committing to having as many different ways for name to spawn as possible. They mentioned everything from like placeholders, timers, variable timers, spawning during certain windows after a placeholder was killed. Some like
Yep.
force spawned by a quest or an item or a world interaction or maybe a
Or
keeper
nighttime or
or
daytime.
nighttime
Yeah.
and daytime.
Yep.
there were little nudge hint. There's some other ideas slung around that were pretty interesting as well, but I can't say anything about those. But yeah, I think it's really important that they use every tool possible to like mix up the boss spawning, because kill the placeholder until the boss spawns. Like,
this is the discussion that we always sort of come back to about competition for content, right? Contested content. How is VR going to deal with contested content? Well, it can't be contested if it's incredibly variable,
right?
I mean, it can, but not in any kind of way that makes any kind of sense for anybody to do it with a reasonable level of effort. I just think that this is so, again, smart design that deals with the problem that people are always worried about, and people uses an argument for instancing and against open worlds, and it's like, it's not that hard. It can be done.
Yeah, as long as they've got the tools to make all these encounters do these kinds of things. Eventually people will figure out how it works, right? Maybe some of the bosses will have different mechanics, but eventually people will figure out. But it still adds a certain layer of learning and knowledge. So you're not just, we just get to this place and we just camp here, period.
Right. But even if they figure it out, if it's so variable that the effort to cover all the variables is not worthy of the reward, like the reward might be great, but if the effort is so monumental to cover all the variables, it still won't be. It'll be, it'll still be available. Won't be as contested as people are worried about.
Yeah, I think I 100% agree, and I think it'll keep people, moving around, and not necessarily always going after this very specific thing, but kind of letting the game happen to them instead. I think is exactly that's really great. Cool. Well, another huge thing they talk about, you can't not talk about this. It's the underwater dungeons. Man, they are really emphasizing that these will not be like Overland dungeons, and definitely not just combat, but underwater.
Catch Keep 3.0. No, we're not doing Catch Keep 3.0.
Yes, so they dug into this a good little bit, and they really emphasize. So the things they like really kind of put out there, I think, was fun. Has to be fun, but also specifically mentioned solid movement mechanics being paramount. And I think that is that is probably the most important thing, right? Is the underwater movement. But they also sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say the underwater movement. See, to me, this topic didn't really resonate with me as much because I didn't really I didn't hear the specifics that I needed to hear. Like, I didn't really hear like how. I mean, there was sort of that. It was more of Joppa speak of philosophical and principles rather than actual mechanics or actual like, this is exactly how we're going to do it. So it was still in the realm of theoretical for me. Like, I get the idea of it. They want to do it. What he was saying. Yeah. But I didn't really understand.
There definitely is an air of like what we want. It's just design talk, right? It's design talk rather than like mechanic talk. But he did mention some mechanics, at least on the board for we would like to do this, right? And so he talked about like, bubbles, obviously, underwater caves, even like sections that are like not submerged. So you swim to it and then you enter a period where it's not submerged as well. Even like currents, and I feel like it's not a Joppa talk lately, unless he mentions riding creatures, right?
Yeah, I know every time he gets a chance, he brings.
I know I could tell he's really excited about it, but we've really got to see it. But he even mentioned like underwater creatures, and obviously I don't know if this is going to be a for sure thing, right? Because we still haven't even seen underwater anything.
And underwater anything.
But I'll mention the example, and that's catching a ride on a creature, and there's definitely seems to be something that isn't in your control, so it might take you where you want, but it also might drag you down to the depths, which
I don't know about that, man. I don't know.
Which might that might be something you want to watch out for. We'll see how that plays out. I think that does kind of lean into their overarching design of like wanting people to take risks, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, risks are one thing, but like, is this dolphin friendly, or is this dolphin going to, smash me into the bottom of the seafloor and bury my corpse beneath a pile of coral? Like, I don't know about that. It seems. I need to see this in I need to see this in action before I can pass judgment on it.
That's true. That we could probably put a pin in it for that. But it was talked about a good amount, and so again, it is probably building up the expectations a little bit high. So we have to see how it goes. But actually, on a small like victory note here, because this is really important to me, but they confirmed that there will absolutely be a dungeon below level 10. And as part of the new player experience changes that they're doing as well. And I think this is incredibly important to me. So
yeah, it's important to me too. And I've said this before, that part of the learning curve, part of the new player experience has to be grouping.
100%.
They've been focused a lot on the 1 to 10 experience with their monk stuff lately, and how this teaches the player their class, but you need to teach people how to use their class in groups. That's it. So there's got to be a sub level 10 dungeon, and they did talk about it. So I was very pleased by that too.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I know we've been, as it kind of happens, we probably spent too much time on this, but as always, definitely check out the stream itself. It was quite good. It was very Joppa. But really, I think the overall takeaway would be, this phrase that Joppa very passionately would say, and that's that the dungeons in Pantheon are meant to be inhabited, and not ran, not necessarily crawled or camped, but inhabited. Very much emphasized the sense of place and just being in an area for an extended amount of time. And I think I really like that.
So do I.
Yeah. And then like kind of the other phrase that keeps ringing, in my head. This is another thing where he's like kind of biting his tongue, right? But he said, when we're in dungeons, there are things. This is so. I can't even read this without like laughing, because this is just so Joppa. But there are things you will find that are unexpected, and he just seems very keen on a certain amount of unpredictability, and I lean on the side of thinking that this will make for some really exciting dungeon experiences if they can pull it all together. But expect the unexpected, Derek.
Yeah, I agree, man. 100%. I love the unexpected, and I want to inhabit many, many dungeons in my time in Pantheon.
Yeah.
I will be a dungeon inhabitant. So that's the roundtable for you. And quickly, let's look at what we're doing this week on Pantheon Plus. If you're here for the premiere on Sunday, July 3rd, well, hey, today is the day for some power leveling. Drac is doing his 8 hours of power leveling on the EQ Thornblade server if you're interested. So hopefully if you've messaged him, you're doing that right now, or maybe you can get in there and join in. But again, it starts on July 3rd, Sunday, 5 p.m. Eastern until 1 a.m. In the morning. And that should be fun. I'm going to be doing some power leveling myself this weekend on EverQuest, because they are doing a bonus. That's why he's doing that. In terms of the rest of our schedule, on Monday, Drac and the crew are doing their midnight EQ after dark on our Twitch channel on Pantheon Plus, Twitch TV. On Tuesday, we're back for EverQuest for more MMOs 101. A lot of EverQuest this week. I feel like EverQuest overload. Anyway, that's 9 o'clock Eastern on our Twitch channel as well. On Thursday, our friend Redbeard Flynn is doing a video about pay to win. So that will be interesting, and he always has good insights from him. Sparrow is also on Thursday playing some WoW Classic on her Twitch channel. That's at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. She's playing Friday as well. She's doing some P99 on her channel. So that starts at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. Our friend Nathan's back with another Cringe Pony TV episode, Saturday night, 11 p.m. Central. And is it 11 p.m.? Yeah, 11 p.m. Central. That's right, midnight Eastern. And that's the schedule for our Pantheon Plus crew and friends between July 4th and 10th. And it's also this week's VR news and notes. When the Pantheon community speaks, we listen. So let's dig into the forums and fan projects to see what the discussion's all about.
All right, first off, I really want to shout out the Pantheon community just in general for actually making the forums, well, at least the general gameplay forums on the official side, pretty active lately with some really neat threads. And like I know it's let's be real, it's such a small percentage of people that operate with forums anymore, right?
Yeah, it is.
But it is really cool to see that it's being used pretty actively lately to just like kind of throw around some, pretty cool ideas and get a lot of responses. Like the threads are like, they're not dying, and that's just, I don't know. This is a cool thing I noticed. Want to point it out.
It's just a long form discussion in general is dying. So the more things where we can promote long form discussion instead of 30-second sound bites and clips is better.
Exactly. And that's why I love, pulling from the forums to give them a little bit of love. But yeah, so there are a few threads I have my eye on we'd have to kind of do a nice big segment on, but in the interest of time, because I can't help but talk about the dev roundtable stuff, but we have a little fun one.
It's fine.
So I'm gonna pull that this week, and this was posted on the official forums by good old GoofyWarriorGuy, and of course later promoted on the official Pantheon social media. It's titled "A Zone by Any Other Name," and it touches on something that, well, I mean, it might be kind of trivial for a lot of folks, but for folks like Moxie Online, who puts a ton of work into the Pantheon wiki, thank you, Moxie, actually, needs to think about. So basically it goes like this. So now that we have a seamless world, and it's obvious that we, what we would once consider zones will no longer be so cut and dry. What do we call them? Like, while we know that some dungeons will have a zone line, there will be a zone in for a lot of dungeons. It does seem that overland zones will be a lot more obscure, often having subzones within, for example, like the Mad Moors within Wild's End or Hangor in Avendir's Pass. So how would one go about labeling these things, especially considering there are some dungeons that are open world or overworld, I should say? Like, how do you think the UI should show these, if at all? So, well, Kilson actually did respond to this thread when he said, hey, I'm promoting this, but also, hey, I brought this to the team. Maybe get some clarification. There's no official VR response yet on what they should be called or how they're structured or whatever. So let's have a quick chat. What do we call these areas?
Areas.
Yeah.
Places. Yeah.
I mean, I know it's a little bit silly. It's a little bit semantic, right? But
no, I like it. I think it's important because of the no zone line, the seamless world thing. I think it maybe got overlooked and swept through up in the hype of that, because you forget that we still need names for places. Like, we still need to know where we are. If you say I'm going to meet me in this zone, well, where does that zone begin and end?
Yeah, especially considering the zones aren't squares, as the right. Roadmap suggests. We're going to have zones with very different boundaries.
Yeah. It's like meet me at the third tree from the left in the Mad Moor, past the stinking swamp.
Exactly.
Just before you get to Ogre Cave 1. Like, that's what it's going to end up being.
Exactly. And so we need a little bit of structure, right? So let's get into some of these suggestions and responses from the community. So first up is going to be Dekensu, and they have a few thoughts. So one, easy comparison is to WoW, right? Because that's also seamless, and they also have zone in dungeons. So but they still call the overworld areas zones, and the dungeons they call instances, which, whatever. But as they point out, there's simply kind of this unobtrusive, like, on-screen message when you cross over. It says, oh, you're in this place now, which they think was pretty effective. And they also note that music is a good way to usher in the idea of a new area, which I thought was right off the bat such a nice little tidbit, right? So like that. So there, can you think of any really, like, memorable music changes when going into a new zone?
Well, not in terms of games that used a seamless design like that. I mean, I think when you zone into the Thundering Steps in EverQuest 2 comes to mind immediately because it had really memorable music.
Hmm.
But then again, that was a hard zone line too. There was a loading process there. So I like the idea though of music sort of overlaying into or transitioning into a different theme being a signifier of a new zone. I think that's an amazing idea, and I hadn't thought of that. And like music is very, you connect it to certain areas,
Oh
like I
yeah.
said with EQ2. But before we started recording, you and I were talking about a really memorable song from Guild Wars 2, right at the end, Fear Not This Night. And I have that completely attached in my brain to that final. I mean, it's not a zone; it's a cutscene, and
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
cinematic or whatever. But still, it's very attached to it. I think using music is a great way to do this. I would really, really love to see them do
Yeah,
that.
I totally agree. We don't have to get into it again, but I have a lot of experiences of zoning into an area, and having very memorable, like, oh, the music hits you and it's like, it just fits, it fits the zone, and then you would just always associate it. Um, and I mean, obviously, things like Isle of Refuge in EQ2, I think is like, that
Yeah,
music is just embedded in my head. Same with the trade skill instance music. So, but
yeah, that's
it is
right.
funny you mentioned that all these are games with like hard zones. Um,
Hmm.
so I see no reason why we wouldn't have that in a seamless world, and I'm sure WoW does this. But I just can't think of any memorable like music that goes along with it. So it's a really
Yeah.
great opportunity for Pantheon, I think.
It would be cool if you could say to somebody like, "Meet me where the music changes." Like, how do I know where you are? Well, meet me where the music switches.
Well,
And that's
you remember
sweet,
the
man.
Halnir's Cave thing from way back in the day with the
Oh
piano
man,
music?
it's funny you brought that up. I was thinking that, but I wasn't going to say it because I don't think it's something they're doing anymore. But they did talk about it in that co-stream when he finds that window, and the music changes. Is a perfect example of what we're talking
Yeah,
about. And they had a name for it at the time, the system they were using, and I haven't heard it mentioned since. But like, yeah, yeah, stuff like
yeah,
that is pretty
great
intense.
opportunity. I hope they're still down with that, even for like big areas, right? I would expect as I approach Sirhirith, right? Like, it's gonna we're gonna get that sound to indicate, hey, you're in the city. You're like, whatever. Anyway, yeah.
A little jaunty tune
Oh yeah, it's
starts.
got to be right. It's got to be. Well, also, I should know that Dekendu also said that they'd like if the UI showed not only like the main zone but also kind of that subzone as like a location underneath. Um, if we are getting into hard UI descriptions, um, I don't know. I think that would be helpful, right? You're in Wild's End, but
Yeah,
Sorhirith or whatever. I don't know.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, the question is, do you display it on the UI somewhere, right? Does it have to be readily available to you, where you are,
Yeah.
and some sort of tangible UI element? I don't know.
Yeah, and that kind of thing comes up with I think Chenzum here in the thread suggests a kind of hierarchy that starts with like the world, then the continent, and then getting more refined as you go. So probably like Wild's End, and then Sorhirith, and kind of that whole structure to kind of tell you in that fashion you're in this place that's within this place that's within this place, um, to help identify your location, which I don't know. Is that too much? Is that too
Um, I
specific?
think so. Yeah, I think so. I don't really need the details. Like, I don't want my coordinates displayed at all times. Like, I don't
Oh
need that.
yeah,
Some people probably would, right? Some people want to know exactly from a XY, axis graph, where am I on the map? Some people would want more specific information. I prefer it again. I think of Elden Ring in this regard and how less is more. It shows you the name when you come into an area. It sort of fades in and out on your right in front of your screen, and then you're never really you're never really told anywhere by a constant UI element what area you're in,
that's
right?
true.
So
Yeah, that is true. Except at the campfires, right? So
yes, that's right.
actually, that's oh man, ooh, we I almost went way off the rails there for a second, but yeah.
Yeah, I felt you going down a rabbit hole there.
But I retreated. So we only have so much time, right? So let's get into the, what do we call it real quick? We'll just do kind of a lightning round of through the thread.
Sure.
What we should call zones. And so Ixar thinks they should just be called zones because that's what everyone's used to, right?
Okay.
Makes sense. But Minuk recommended realms, which is very
Fair enough.
We've got a pretty good consensus here from Hokanu, Fated Emperor, Snow Trudger, I think, and a few others. They suggest regions, which I think is pretty descriptive.
Regions,
Counterflesh could go for zones or regions as well. Dorothea says just areas. Vandrad and Rattenman say they think like no matter what, zones are just going to be what people call it.
Yeah, that's probably right. It doesn't matter what we call them. What matters is what VR calls them.
Yeah, and that's kind of a fun like reason I wanted to grab this thread now is, for all we know, like VR is going to pop into the thread and be like, yeah, this is how we kind of organize it, which would be nice for for the wiki folk to try to like put the information together. Because even if it's not like shown in game, I do like the idea of some sort of organization, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it needs to be. There does need to be a structure to it, and there does need to. As much as I'm, advocating for like, no apparent UI element, there does need to be some structure to it because it's still a game, and we will refer to it as zones. I like realms. I mean, personally, realms is a nice. Just from a literary standpoint, and maybe it's because of the like Forgotten Realms connection in my mind, but I like that word.
It definitely rolls off the tongue to be like, oh yes, I'm in the realm of Wild's End, or I'm in the realm of Thronefast.
Yes, that's I like that. That would get my vote. What about you? Which one would you pick?
I like regions because I'm probably too logical for this. But I do agree, for literature and narrative, like realms just sounds so cool. But I think someone in the thread, I'm sorry if you're listening and I forgot your name, but someone in the thread pointed out that like they don't need to reinvent the wheel. Like they don't need to call them something that's like, really novel.
Obscure.
But yeah. So it's really not about what it's called. It's really about how it's structured. And hopefully VR hops into that thread and gives an answer, and then the community, I'm sure, will just call them whatever we feel like. Right.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's what it's going to be. It's going to be emergent gameplay no matter what.
Yep.
Right? So it's going to be like community votes. This is what we say it is, and that's what it is.
Yep, 100%. Well, fun little semantic thread. Feel free to put your ideas in there and check in on it. See if VR gives a for sure answer. If they just kind of let us wallow in our but yeah, and we're gonna skip a spotlight this week, so next week I'll be doing catch up as everyone posts their videos and content of various kinds, but that's gonna be it for this week's community discussion.
Mail on a Sunday? That's right, let's check the mailbox. Let's check the mailbox because we have a couple mail questions from our community. And the first one is from Kyle Katarn, our friend and listener to the show. And Kyle says, I think overall VR has done a much better job communicating with their fan base and pledgers during this heads down period than the last one. And he's referring to Fairthale. Project Fairthale. So he said, however, this time we may be stretching into territory where they're running out of content to show, as the integration might be taking longer than anticipated, but that could still be proven wrong. What do you think they could do to improve further on any future and inevitable heads down periods? So, what do you think, Desmond? I'm gonna put the pressure on you and get you to take this first one. But what do you think?
Well, first of all, because it's mailbox, I like specifically didn't like think about an answer ahead of time, right? But
why do you think I'm giving it?
But I do agree that like this, we're in a much better state than Project Fairthale, and I think Kyle points out a really prominent thing that I agree with, and that's we might be getting into a point where they are showing a lot like as it's coming, so that there might not be a lot in the background. Because that's usually my stance is I don't think there's 10 times as much content that they're not showing. But there is a point where they're probably showing not more than they're making, but like basically what they're making. And it is a bit problematic, right? And eventually, I'm sure we just went through a bit of a heads down period that was really successful, I would say.
Yes.
So good on them for that. But
that's what I was gonna say as well, is that I think we learned a lot of lessons from this period, and I think those lessons need to be incorporated for future episodes or future head down periods. I think Minus, and I'm gonna give him props because what he did. So remember that dev stream where they checked in with all the different members of the areas of the team. So you had check in from HR, you had a check in from quality assurance, you had all these different heads of their departments or members of their departments checking in. Creative content like that is the key. Doing things that haven't been done before, trying new things, and being open to taking chances with different styles of presentation. That's the key here, because it keeps people talking. Even if it's not content that is new, people are going to be talking about what you did,
Yeah.
And it's going to be good and bad. You're going to have some misses, like making jokes about alpha, but you're also going to have some hits, like checking in with the heads of the departments. I think that's a trade-off that you make, and I think that is the lesson VR should take from this period and apply to future periods.
I actually think specifically a few things made it so much better, and the first one is that we got a heads up, way ahead of time. I feel like way ahead of time.
Too, super
so we
important.
know this thing's coming. Yeah. They gave vague projections, which I think is the right thing. You don't want to give a specific one because, as we just recently saw, they gave a specific projection and they missed it a little bit. But not to say they're like behind or anything, just it's what happens. Yeah. But yeah, they gave us a heads up and they prepared content. So it seems like they knew ahead of time, okay, so we're not going to be able to show all this stuff because we're heads down for this. So here's our alternative during the meantime. It was really smart. And if we ever have another heads down period, I hope they do the same thing, because I think those two things are really what carried it for me. Like the specific side of the content that you mentioned was really great. The check-in was one of my favorites, right? But the preparation of content during that and the letting everyone in the community know the time is coming was, without either of those things, I think it would have felt a lot worse, right? So
agreed.
Yeah.
And I think that this upcoming developer roundtable that's open to everybody is another example of something that they're doing, another idea, something new, something novel we haven't seen before. It keeps the community interested and excited. Even if it doesn't always work out great, it still is a thing that shows that they're active, they're, aware of their need to communicate and remain transparent. True. So I really it's a good question. Thanks, Kyle, for that question. Do you want to read the next one from Colin?
Sure. So this is Colin 104. We know him as Agil. So
your EQ too, buddy.
And now League of Legends, surprisingly.
Nice.
Though I probably shouldn't have outed myself on the show like that. But so
we know how toxic you are, Des.
I know, right?
You talk.
So the full question is going to be this: should spells such as Phase and Summon Wrath from the Summoner and Order of the Gatewalkers from the Wizard take large amounts of mana to cast? Or has VR mentioned how much mana these spells should consume? I imagine that spells such as these would consume large amounts of resources. So, for example, think of the amount of power it requires to summon a raft that can carry your group down a river or through the ocean. Should something like that cost at least 75% of your max mana? Pretty straightforward question that I get to throw straight to you because you had me read it.
And because I prepared something, because I actually saw this question and went back. It reminded me of something that was said in the May developer roundtable. That was, and we didn't touch on this. They talked about long cooldown abilities. So one of the things that was mentioned by Kyle in that, it was Adam, it was Teom that talked in this one. He said the highest cooldown ability they have at the moment is 5 minutes, but he also loves 30-minute cooldowns, and there's a place for that. He said that they weren't committing to it, though. They said the limited action set has to factor into it. And that, would it be something you'd ever put on your ability bar if it had a super long cooldown and you were going to wait and sort of review this down the road? This is where I think this comes into play. I think instead of taking up most of your mana, I think this is the kind of spells that you put on super long cooldowns. And maybe that's, obvious. Maybe that's something that's like, people are like, yeah, no doubt, it shouldn't be like a 5-minute thing. But on the other hand, what if you needed to summon a raft multiple times to get to a certain location and, you've only got one summoner in the group, right? Do you need a second summoner? Do you need to find somebody who has an alternate ability to get to the next place? I think it really increases your group interdependence. You could make it cost a lot of mana, but I think that would be less interesting because you can just down regen.
Yeah.
It's a time sink more than a tactical consideration, as opposed to like, if it's a long cooldown, you're gonna have to really come up with another strategy for it. So I would go with cooldown timers as opposed to mana cost. What about you?
I completely agree. I mean, to put it super simply, I think the long cooldown for, like, you even put it so well, the tactical abilities is just so great, so that I'm assuming you won't be able to move stuff off of your bar when it's on cooldown, right? So you have to deal with that consequence.
Right. That would be a cheat, obviously.
Yeah. So assuming that, I much prefer the long cooldown for big abilities like this, because, I don't think the mana really matters that much, but I also think big stuff like this should require a component. I think this is a lot of the Mortal Online 2 side talking, because big spells in that game require big components. And
nice. I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah. That's why they can have these crazy powerful spells where, like, in the previous game, it's not in the second game yet, but they had some, like, literally changing the weather. I think one of them even causes like fireballs to fall from the sky, like just crazy stuff. But the thing is, like, those components, it would be like, it would be like consuming a high-end piece of raid gear in order to do them. Maybe not that extreme, but I do think along with a long cooldown, there should be some sort of item, because as we've found out, most likely when you die, you're going to drop what is on you, right? And
what's in your
what
inventory.
I would like to avoid is situations where someone goes naked into do one of these tactical spells. So I think they should carry some kind of risk, as in at least they have to carry the component, right?
That's a good point.
Yeah, as well as the cooldown. So I know that might sound strict, but I do put a lot of weight on these kind of tactical things. Because I think, like the raft, for example, there's a lot of waterworks on even the continent we have a map of, and crossing a river, I feel like the choice is, well, we could try swimming and probably die.
Or get eaten by an unfriendly dolphin, perhaps.
Right. Or, we have a summoner that can get us a raft at a price, right? Because you don't want to trivialize it, but you want to make it a real decision. And I don't want it to be like a summoner that just, they parked their alt to the ferryman. I think that's kind of how I would like it, with that much weight.
I love that. That's a great answer to that, and I hadn't even thought of that. But awesome questions from both Kyle and Colin this week. So if you have a question for the mailbox, hop into our Discord. There's a channel called Rewind Mailbox that you can leave your question in, and when we get enough of them, we answer them and go again. So look forward to the next time. So that'll wrap up the mailbox. Sit back and relax. It's time for the lore you know. All right. In the final chapter of Aracamel's tale, we're going to learn more about the Dire. What is it? Is it a curse? Is it a boon? Or is it something else entirely? These are the questions that the ogre has to deal with. And should he embrace the changes that he's facing, or should he fight them? Well, find out as we listen along, as I read the words of J.N. Gerhardt, Pantheon's lead writer in this week's Lore You Know. In the months that followed, the Dire came to Arakhamel with increasing power, though most often as he slept. It would seem to warn him of threats even before his ears could detect them. The Black Moon sent dozens of warriors after him, assassins, and even groups of shaman, yet the Dire revealed them all. In time, Arakhamel became less of an ogre and more of what is known as a Dire Lord. Yet, unlike most in that unsettling fraternity, Arakhamel did not seem to trust the dark mystery that dwells within. Much of his effort was spent keeping the powerful force in check, careful to wield and not be wielded by. As months became years, he spent much of his time as a soldier for hire, or occasionally leading small bands of Dawn or Dire devotees. Yet knowledge, more than war, was Arakhamel's focus, and no matter his battlefield success, the Dire would push him further into isolation. He did not revel or boast. He spoke no reply to challengers or fools. In fact, he rarely used words at all, even going so far as to place a slate mask over his mouth to speak for his silence. In contrast, the Dire whitened his skin, removing him further from the appearance of an ogre and towards that of an apparition. His eyes stayed forever black, with smoke-like stains fanning out around the rim, as if they'd been on fire for years. For several years, Arakhamel continued to be hunted, but the body count of these assailants only grew in kind. In the early months, most were killed with his bare hands, until he fashioned the black-bladed weapon known as Moonfell. While he's no longer actively sought, there is a rumor that a bounty remains on his head, and even that his name is carved into the very throne of the Black Moon clan. This is so every successor king who sits upon it will be taunted until the dawn is dead. Arakhamel has carvings of his own, but the cuts are into his skin rather than wood. These are the red runes that adorn his body, and their meaning is a riddle without an answer, perhaps even to Arakhamel himself. Some have taken to calling these inscriptions the Tome of the Dawn, completing a rather peculiar circle. One that suggests the three virtues may have power even greater than those in Broken Maw could have imagined. The Dawn, the Tome, the Dire. And that is the lore you know. Oof. All right. Well, our road trip has reached its destination, Desrin, and
Destination.
I'm feeling destination. Yeah, oh, I love it. So, all right, man. I'm feeling pretty relaxed. I'm ready to enjoy my holidays. Thanks, Desrin, for joining me on this trip today. I hope you had a good time.
Oh yeah, it was a blast as usual.
Right on. And thanks to everyone else for hanging out with us today. We will be back next week for episode 109. And just remember to check out our social media and check the channel here for videos that we may have mentioned. Check the show notes for links to all the content we discussed. And I hope everybody has a wonderful summer week. And until next week, cheers and thanks for listening.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Pantheon Plus Rewind. Pantheon Plus is not affiliated with Visionary Realms. Be sure to check out our Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube channels under the name Pantheon Plus. You can follow Theric at Pantheon Theric on Twitter, and Desrin at Desrin Does also on Twitter. And you can stay up to date with all things Pantheon at www.pantheon.plus. Until next time, cheers, and thanks for listening.